Your values as an organization need to be woven into everything that you do.
Denise Leon, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
I am extremely excited to have you. Brand leadership, culture, messaging, best-selling author of Fusion and What Great Brands Do. You assist so many different companies on their brand leadership and messaging and culture that I'm so excited to sort of pick your brain in the next 20 minutes on what that even means. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what is branding in general?
Yeah. Well, so the number one thing you need to know about me is that I love brands. I've been very passionate about brands, not only as a consumer or customer, kind of, I have my favorite brands, but as a professional, I really tried to understand how brands really engage people, seduce people, invite people into their community, into their world, and people, both customers and employees and other partners. And so you asked me about the definition of branding, and I actually, frankly, don't use the term branding because I think that, branding, if you think about where that term came from, it was back when people had cattle and ranches and they would like brand their cows with their logos so that people would know that the cows belonged to them. And that's really not what is necessary or appropriate or compelling in today's
marketplace.
We're not putting our logos on things just so that people know who owns it or who it belongs to. What I consider to be brand building is much more about what you do and how you do it. So it really becomes very much a part of your business strategy and your operations, and to your point, your culture and your organization.
So why is this even a topic that needs discussion? Why do so many people and companies struggle with exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of companies still do think about their branding, and so they think about what should our name be, what should our logo look like, what should our website look like, what should our colors be, and all of things are important because we are communicating and trying to engage people through communications. But if you don't have the strategic foundation of what you stand for, what your values are, how you're engaging your employees to deliver great customer experiences, then and what is your differentiation and all of that, then you really don't have a brand. You don't have something that is meaningful and valuable and that really can create that connection for you.
Talk to me a bit about your journey. How do you even get started with becoming passionate about this topic and helping others then overcome it?
Yeah. So I started I studied like liberal arts background in college. I was a psychology, political science double major. And my first job out of school was in marketing. I was a market research analyst. And so my first few jobs were really kind of foundational in the sense of, learning in market research, learning to understand how consumers made decisions and how companies could communicate with them, and to influence those decisions. I also did some product management. So really figuring out, how do you research and develop products and how you bring them to market. And then I worked in an advertising agency to really figure out how do you create the creative communications and the engagement with customers. And out of all those experiences, Sony Electronics recruited me, and I ended up starting up their first ever brand office.
Wow.
And it was there at Sony that I really learned so much about the value of internal organizational alignment and engagement. At the time, this is back like in the 90s, so I'm definitely dating myself, but Sony had just started to kind of see some chinks in the armor as Apple was rising. And, the thing about Apple is that, their emotional connection and their ability to just create this relationship with their customers is so powerful. And, and Sony definitely wanted to compete on that, but without the internal understanding of how were we going to do that? What does Sony really stand for? What do we really have to offer? Like, we couldn't compete on speeds and feeds anymore because Apple and other players definitely were going to be outdoing us on technology. So what was that emotional connection that we create? And if we internally within Sony didn't have one common understanding of that, there was no way we were going to be able to deliver on that externally. So learned a lot about that at Sony. And then for a variety of reasons, which I can tell you over a drink sometime, I ended up resigning my job and starting my own kind of brand consultancy, brand consulting practice. And did that for quite a few years, had some opportunities to work on these great brands that you were referring to. And then over time, I've really shifted from doing a lot of consulting and a little bit of speaking and writing to doing mostly speaking and writing and then just a little bit of consulting.
Right. So now getting this message across and helping others understand engagement better and culture. And Brent, why is engagement difficult internally within a company? So I'm now asking, as a young entrepreneur, as I go through my journey of hopefully building a company and thinking about culture myself and growing the team, I now get to be a part of a 270 person team in a hyper growth company and seeing the culture. What are some pitfalls that the leaders make when they're trying to engage their both their consumers but also their employees, and then what are some important things to keep in mind?
Yeah. Well, actually, a lot happens in that journey that you just described, because I think that when you were small and just starting up, you and your co-founders probably have a really, clear vision on what you want to stand for and the kind of company you want to create. But I think that often what happens is either A, you kind of take that for granted, and as you add more people, you kind of just assume that everyone gets it. And or B, you get so consumed with operations and development and really trying to build a business that those things overtake your desire to create this great organization. And so you in the scaling process, you lose that focus on, really what are we about and really what are we creating. And so then you wake up one day and, like you say, you have 200 employees and you're like, oh my gosh, and our culture sucks, and we're competing in this brutal war for talent, and we are trying to offer an experience to our employees that may or may not be competitive. And so I think that you really need to, as a leader of your organization, as one of the people who's driving the growth, you need to be very intensely focused on prioritizing culture building. Understand that it doesn't just happen, and that you need to be not only talking about it all the time to make sure that you're clear on the kind of culture you want and the kind of organization you want, but then also role modeling that culture. So you can't just be all words; it needs to be action. And then finally, that you are actually designing and running your organization to cultivate that kind of culture. So which groups of your department, which departments or which groups in your company need to be working together better, or need to make sure there's really tight alignment and integration, and make sure that you're cultivating that in the way that you run the organization. Are there certain employee experiences or employee rituals or artifacts or policies or procedures? All of these things you need to be thinking about as you put those in place to make sure that they represent and really support and advance your desired culture. So culture building really is a strategic leadership responsibility that you as a founder or as an entrepreneur need to be, accepting that responsibility and championing it.
I think that's fascinating. It's, I heard you speak at a few other occurrences, and a lot of the times, it's this idea that, we can put posters on the wall that scream our culture and our messaging, but then actions speak louder than words, right? And when I think about brand, and when I think about, what a company expresses, people always think outside of the company, right? How are outside consumers going to interact with our products? But then I think people also forget, and I sometimes forget, that at the end, it's the people building these products have to live by these experiences and by these messages, right? So that they can develop the products that other people will be happy about. What are some common themes that you're seeing as startups are scaling, with the pitfalls that leaders are making as they're losing out on that culture? Is it simply that they forget? or do other things come in the way?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes they'll delegate it to someone. So, again, as a founder or leader, you've got lots of responsibilities. And so you think, okay, I can't do everything. I'm going to hire good people to work for me. And certainly, you need to have strong people to execute your strategies and to help you, implement your tactics. But you can't, as a leader, ever kind of abdicate your responsibility for culture building. And if you don't empower, if you don't give, like, let's say if you have a head of employee experience or a head of HR, if you don't give them the tools and investment and resources they need to create this great employee experience, they're going to be, hamstrung. And so their effectiveness is very much tied to your buy-in to this. So it's really important for you to make sure that you are continuing to lead. The other things I think is to understand that your values as an organization need to be woven into everything that you do. Again, like you said, they can't just be words on a page, but you need to be applying them, especially to your people decisions. Who to hire, who to fire, who to promote, who to develop. And you need to be using your values as a filter or as a screen for your people, not only because that'll make sure that you have the right people in the right positions doing the right work, but that's also probably one of the most important or most influential ways that you share your values with the organization. If someone sees you saying that, creativity and risk-taking is important, but you are always kind of penalizing people when they fail, or you're actually firing people because they failed or they took a risk and it didn't turn out, then people are going to be like, well, wait a minute. That value that you were talking about doesn't really seem to be a reality, really.
Of course.
So you need to be kind of thinking, okay, if this is the kind of value that I want to have in my organization, the best way to show that I mean what I say is in my decisions about people.
100%. And I think it also speaks to the hire slow, fire fast, right? This idea that think about the people that are in the company. They're not just skillful people that are getting things done, but every hire is going to impact the culture. And obviously the higher up in the ladder you go, the more critical it is. What are some incredible things that you've seen people do in order to create good engagement with their employees or their customers outside? Some things that I might not even be thinking of as I'm growing my own company.
I get a lot of examples from Airbnb because I did a deep dive into that organization when I wrote my book, Fusion. And so, they created an employee experience department where they brought in all the different functions that impact an employee's day-to-day experience and, brought them together under one person and into one consolidated group, which meant that they were looking at the employee experience kind of the way that you look at a customer experience, like the journey that employee has throughout their tenure. And so they would, they started their employee experience during recruiting, where in addition to all of the functional screenings that someone has to go through, as a potential recruit, you also are interviewed twice just based on values. And that way the company really gets to know what your values are and gets to assess whether there's alignment with the company's values. And what's really interesting is that these values interviews are not done by the hiring manager. They're done by members of a committee specifically designated towards values interviews. And two, if they decide that this candidate is not a fit, like culturally, or is not aligned with the values, they can actually override the hiring.
Oh, wow.
Those person could be, absolutely the right skills, right experience. The company's not gonna hire them. So, it's like having very, prescriptive, strict standards that enables a company like Airbnb to attract the kind of people who really believe in the mission and who work by the values. And then on the backside, in recent months, Airbnb's had to lay off a lot of employees.
Yes.
And the way that they've done so, the letter from Brian Chesky, got a lot of play. Just the humanity and the compassion and the empathy that was, I think, demonstrated through that is another kind of sign of how seriously the company takes employee experience and
definitely
engagement.
100%. So you made a conscious decision yourself to transition your experience from that of building the brand of a certain company and culture of a certain company to now looking in the broader picture about a lot of different companies. So first of all, I'd love to hear about this transition and why are you so excited about the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I felt like I could have a lot more impact on a lot more companies if I were to, kind of increase my speaking business and increase my writing and really just kind of try to get my ideas out more. When you work for a single company or when you do the kind of brand consulting that I first was doing when I first came out of Sony, it's like deep dive into the organization. And so you can really affect change within that one organization.
Right.
But I kind of felt like I was limited in a way, and especially because unlike maybe the folks who are listening to this interview, I wasn't going to grow a big company. It was just going to be me. I wasn't going to have any employees. And so, the rate limiting factor is my bandwidth. So I'm like, okay, if
right.
I want to impact the most people that I can, it's going to have to be through speaking and writing. And it turns out that I think when I did a lot of self-examination about what I got excited about and what I found life-giving, what I felt like I really wanted to get better and better at, like it was a passion of mine to really hone my skills at, it was speaking. It was really kind of getting out there in front of people and figuring out how do I take what's in my head and all the research and experience that I've had and be able to like communicate that in a way to people that they understand. That's just fascinating to me. And I consider
100%.
So that's what gets me up every day, really.
I love it.
Excited about that challenge.
I love it. So alongside that messaging, so Fusion, What Great Brands Do, tell me a little bit about each book and what I can expect to find in there, and maybe one or two nuggets that we can extrapolate from each.
Yeah. So What Great Brands Do, the 7 brand building principles that separate the best from the rest. Now, this book came out in 2014, so some of the examples are a little bit dated, but I continue to hear from people today of how informative these 7 principles are, because it really takes you through some counterintuitive practices of brand building. Like great brands avoid selling products. Like they don't, push products on people, promote features, kind of tout their technology. They're much more, as I said earlier, kind of into this business of seducing people and drawing people in and making emotional connection. And so my book shows you how to do that, gives you some tools and frameworks, and then lots of case studies and examples. Right. My second book, Fusion, How Integrating Brand and Culture Powers the World's Greatest Companies, is about how you take your internal organizational culture and your external brand identity and ensure that they are mutually reinforcing and definitely like integrated and aligned and intertwined in such a way that you really, are on the inside what you say are on the outside, because then not only do you engage your people really effectively, but you pass the customer test of brand authenticity. Because these days customers want to know, really what's behind the curtain, and they have the ability to find out. So you want to make sure that how you're operating your organization really is with integrity and authenticity. So I highly recommend those 2 books. And then I will say for your audience in particular, I've written a small book called, or it's a paper really, a Change This Manifesto about minimum viable brand. And it's all kind of based on the minimum viable product.
Yeah.
But it says, given that you're going to have limited resources, limited time when you're first starting out, what are the few things that you need to make sure that you have in place as you're building your brand? And so all of these things can be found on my website, and hopefully there'll be good resources for your folks.
100%. I think everything you talked about is just fascinating. I think that today, especially in 2020, and we've seen especially this year how important company culture is, both in terms of adapting to layoffs and a lot of stuff that's been coming out over recent years in company culture is, I think, things that people in my years of studying and people in my age group that are starting companies were very, very conscious of, and we're always thinking, okay, from day zero, how do we get the right culture? And just the other day, my good friend who's just finished the Stanford Business School, he asked me, Michael, what is going to be your shtick as a CEO? I'm going to be the nature CEO, and that's the culture that I want to build in my company. And so people are thinking of what types of niche markets they like to address and what type of cultures and communities they want to build. I think that's amazing. I know that in the company that I'm with now, Hippo Insurance, the culture is incredible, and I'm fascinated to sit next to the CEO when I get to and talk to him about the way that he addresses these problems. And every onboarding process is a new adventure and a new celebration by over 200 people, which is just incredible. But Denise, before we leave, I have to ask the most important question: 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Yeah, Michael, that's such a hard question.
It's the hardest one, and I don't prepare enough, so I'm sorry as well.
Yeah, no. So I have 2, and maybe the third one will come to me. Definitely like achievement, like driven. Okay.
Yes.
So I'll do with these. Driven. I am definitely like someone who sees a goal, sets a goal, goes after it.
Sure.
And 2, I'm very disciplined in the sense that I can like have like my way of doing things. My whole life is kind of arranged in a way so that I can achieve my goals. And so those are the 2. The third one, I'm not sure. I would say maybe this is more than one word, but like since I'm doing the D's, like dedicated to my faith in the sense that I'm a person of faith and I really am guided by my faith. And so that provides the center and the core for me. So I kind of cheated and used more than one word on that last one, but hopefully
that's perfectly fine.
Discipline dedicated to my faith.
Denise, thank you very, very much. This is fascinating. I can't wait to read these books myself. It sounds like it's something that's incredibly insightful for any young entrepreneur or any leader that wants to affect change in their own community, whether it's in a company or whether it's in a simple community in their family or whatever it is. It sounds like it's relevant for a lot of different things besides business. Thank you very, very much, Denise. I really appreciate it. Stay safe and stealthy. Bye-bye.